Well, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. I've been embarrassed to say that I've never been in this auditorium, and this is a great setup. And so I have to tell you that we really were open-minded about how many people might show up for this. And at one point, about 10 minutes ago, I was thinking, why don't we just pull up a couple of tables and we can all sit around, and then a bunch of you showed up at the last minute. So thank you for that. So we are mic'd, and so hopefully you can hear me okay. So what I'm going to do, and I see a lot of familiar faces, and a lot of very familiar faces, and then some of you I don't think I've figured out yet. There were some people that I know that I didn't recognize until they got a little closer and realized I knew them. So I would imagine that the majority of you are familiar with what I do. In fact, can I ask for a show of hands? How many of you here have never heard me do a presentation under these kind of circumstances? Oh, all right, more than, okay, very good. Basically, in the talks that I do, I go in with a rough idea on what I'm going to do, but I don't do the same talk every time. And if I'm not quite sure what the makeup is going to be, I get there and look them over. And so a number of the talks, if we go a distance, I'm going to assume that not everybody's a race fan, and we may take a bit more of a 101 approach. But since I recognize so many faces, and you read the publicity and decided to come, then you must have some idea of what we do. And so I just basically like to tell anecdotes, and we don't have any commercial breaks tonight, so I can tell longer stories than we get to do on the air. But just a couple of general announcements, if you like, and thoughts, and then we'll get into that portion of the program. Obviously, we're coming up for the 103rd running of the 500, which we think is totally unique because we don't believe there's been another automobile race that's been held 103 times. And I'll go off on an early tangent here that the French Grand Prix was first held in 1906, and the Indianapolis 500 was 5 years after that, but because Europe was down for World War I for so long, by 1919, the Indianapolis 500 had already been held more times than the French Grand Prix then. So, but most of you, I think, are probably already familiar with that. I'm going to assume that the majority of you go or have been to the Indianapolis 500, specifically the race. If I could see is there anybody who has not? And don't be embarrassed. All right, I figured as much, and if anybody had not, then I would assume that you might have been out there for practice and time trials and so forth. So anyway, there's, as far as the storylines for this year, I'm sure that many of you are more up to date on it than I am. Times have changed. I remember very well when there would be a press release come out to say that the entries had been mailed over the Christmas New Year holiday, and then on January the 2nd or 3rd, Phil Headback would be standing at the office ready to put in an entry, or somebody, and then the first entry was a big deal, and then all the way through the spring, up until the April 15th, they would be trickling in, and you'd watch Jim Wilson, Channel 8, and John Totten, whoever it was, and 6 more entries for the 500 today, and then there would be a last-minute rush. And then they would have, because the entries used to have to be postmarked by April the 15th. And if you mailed it from Indianapolis, they probably have it on the 16th. But if you mailed it in Casper, Wyoming, it would take a few days. And so it would probably be, around the 20th, 21st, 22nd, you get the final entry list. Well, we don't do that anymore. in fact, last year, I mean, there was a lot of speculation on the entries, and I'm not really making comments one way or another, except it's very different. Can you keep up with the entries? Well, you have to read all the blogs and social media stuff, which I don't do, and I'm sure that many of you got much better idea on what might be the final entry list than I do. But when do we actually see that list? Well, I think last year it was after the road race before I saw the first actual entries. So it's different, isn't it? So anyway, probably the big storylines are, Alonso coming back is obviously a huge story, and there's some other F1 people, and now we don't have to wait till we're 21, 22 years old anymore. Now we've got several people in the mix that are aiming to knock down Troy Ruttman's record as the youngest winner ever. And we've got 18 and 19-year-old kids driving race cars. That's and several of them. So we'll just wait and see what happens there. As far as the museum is concerned, for about the last 3 years, or maybe a little bit more now, there's been a situation where quite an area of the museum is donated to an exhibit, which is normally up for close to 6 months. And so for those of you that, I'm sure most of you are semi-regular visitors to the museum, there's been the Foyt display and the Unser family and Parnelli and Dan Gurney, and then more recently the short track exhibit, which was very, very popular. And now there's a new one coming in to recognize Mario Andretti's the 50th anniversary of his win. There's actually an event going on tonight, which is sort of like the grand secret opening for museum members, and then I think it's open to the public tomorrow. I don't know that 100% of the exhibit is in, but the greater part of it, so you might want to give it a day or two. But pretty soon there'll be a huge exhibit on Mario up and running. And then we're being recorded here, so I can't really be too flippant with my next observation about the fact. Well, I'll do it anyway, what the heck. I'm not doing this forever, and but we've been going around reaching out to NBC affiliates, not only around the state, but we've traveled out a little bit. And I think that for those of you that follow us on social media, and maybe that's a little presumptuous on my part, because I'm learning a bunch of stuff about social media slowly. And my traveling partner is Mike Harmless, the former two-time mayor of Greencastle, and I know that he's got a lot of people who like him and sends all this stuff out. So he's the gentleman sitting down here in the front row here, minus his bow tie, and we're just casual tonight. But anyway, we in addition to doing Chambers of Commerce and Kiwanis and Satoma and those kind of groups, we actually reached out to NBC affiliates, and we've had a lot of success with some of them. We did some really good stuff in Dayton, and we went to Toledo, St. Louis yesterday, and we did Lexington, Kentucky, and Evansville, which is actually further than Lexington, Kentucky, we think, and Louisville. And so anyway, the point is that we've been going there because some of them are race enthusiasts, and some of them have kind of got this thrust upon them, and there's, they're not quite sure how to deal with the thing. So we're just basically drawing attention to the fact that the Indianapolis 500 is going to be on NBC. But if you turn off the equipment, please, it would be great for the next couple of moments. No, I'm just kidding. But I've had some fun with some of my colleagues because I'm thinking, wait a minute, we're going to these places to say, watch it on NBC. I work for the track. They're trying to sell tickets so that you'll come and watch the race. Plus, I'm on the radio network, and we want, hopefully you would go to the race and listen to the radio. And so the other thing is that NBC swept in and took the radio booth, so they had to relocate. And so I don't want my friends to know that I'm promoting NBC because they took our booth. But anyway, but that's all in good fun. A number of you have been asking about the Talk of Gasoline Alley, and that will start on Monday night, coming up, the 6th. Oh, thank you. Will it be in the garage area from 6 until 7? Unfortunately not. For quite a number of years now, we've been from 8 till 9, and if the track is not open, thank you for that, by the way. If the track's not open, then we come down to the Circle, to the Emmis building, and if the track is open, then we're on the 4th floor media center. But I missed the 6 till 7 slot with all of the noise going on in the garages and impact wrenches and engines firing up and chief mechanics take your pop-off valves to the USAC office and no smoking in the garage area and all this kind of stuff. But it's worked out very well. I was a little sad when that happened, and that's been, 4 or 5 years ago, I think. But the nature of the broadcast business was beginning to change, and that was, people were starting to stream and download, and I'm learning all these terms, and basically it was that nobody listens to the radio anymore. They download the stuff and listen to it the next morning, I think. But anyway, the program still has a following, which is really flattering to me, and we're going to be doing that again. And then, a couple of other notes here. How many of you are now or have ever been a yellow shirt? Just one. Maybe a couple. All right. I thought it might be more. Seriously, how many out there have ever thought that they might like to be a yellow shirt? Very good. Then hopefully there might be more, and I'll talk for a few moments and try and build some enthusiasm. Obviously, if you came here tonight, then you know what a yellow shirt is. I don't have to explain that. They need people. With the upswing on attendance. Huh? Oh, you're gonna, all right, then go ahead. I'll pitch it anyway, and hopefully there'll be some more. They are hiring. And I know some people say, well, I can't do it because I want to go to qualifications and I want to go to the race. That doesn't matter. They'll work it out with you. People have jobs and they can't do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday practice, and they need people. There are husband and wife teams that do it, a lot of retirees, but not necessarily college kids. There are people that have done it for 35 and 40 years and they don't even live in Indiana. They take a vacation and come back and to be a yellow shirt. And so not to get your hopes up too much, I always tell people, you may not get pits or garage area the first time, but you will be on the grounds. You won't be at Eastgate Shopping Center loading buses that go to the track. You'll be at the track. And then the fact that you have the credentials, even if they put you in turn 3 or you're in the infield or up in the stands, when you get your break, you can go about anywhere, including garage area and pits. And little story that I tell, depending on the audience, but you might enjoy this. When Foyt was driving the Sheraton Thompson Specials, the partnership in that team before he became an owner himself was 2 Indianapolis businessmen named Bill Anstead and Shirley Murphy. And I know that Shirley Murphy, we've had a lot of fun with that because Some people thought it was a rich lady, and Shirley Murphy was a man. Very successful businessman, and a huge shareholder in Sheraton Hotels, and owned a number of businesses either in Indianapolis or operating out of here. And for years, he was on the safety patrol, even before it was the yellow shirts. When they had the blue outfits and the pith helmets and the ties and the whistles and everything, he would sign on to the safety patrol every year. And you'll see him in a lot of the shots. He'd be in Victory Lane and in some of the qual shots and everything. And I met him very early on in my presence at the track. And he told me, he said, I like to kind of be incognito and travel around by myself. And he said, honestly, I do this every year because my credentials offer me more access on the safety patrol than I have as a car owner. And so anyway, it's a lot of fun, and I have forgotten to mention this a couple of times. It's not a voluntary position. It pays $8 an hour. And it's not just 500 and what used to be month of May. It's Brickyard 400. It's the air races. It's ladies golf. It's the lights at over the holidays, if you like, and then other functions as well. So I hope I didn't oversell it. But if you've thought that you might want to do that, or you know somebody that might, seriously, they would be very happy to talk to you. Mayor Harmless has the basic information on a card. If you think about it later and haven't picked up a card, just go out to the admin building on the corner of what used to be 16th and Georgetown, which is now the roundabout, and then just go in, and you're all probably familiar with turning right to go to the ticket office. Turn left instead and go over to the little window that's on the other side of the switchboard, and they will be very, very happy to see you. So is there anybody right now that thinks that they might want a card? All right, all top row, boss. Oh, there's a couple way up there. And so if anybody else, we can distribute those right now. And then we're going to do something else, which hopefully is some fun. And I'll set this part up. We've got a couple of items to give away, except we're not exactly going to give it away. And some of you have done 2, 3, 4 of these. And so I will, forgive me if you've heard these ad-libs before, but we've got 2 sets of qualification tickets, two pairs, which are good for either the 18th or the 19th. You can't use them 2 different days. You've got one or the other. And then we have 1 set of GP, if you like, Indy GP, which is the road race that opens what used to be the month. They're general admission. They do not entitle you to a seat, but you can walk around as many people prefer to do and sit on the mounds and so on and so forth. And so I'm just thinking how I should do this. I will tell you that I had fun with one the other night when we were at the Speedway Public Library, and I knew there were some heavy-duty people in there. And what we ask you to do is we'll pose the question. If you think you know what the answer is, if you would raise your hand, please, rather than call out, and then we'll select somebody, and then we'll keep going. If you don't get the correct answer, we'll keep going within reason until we get somebody with the correct answer, and then we'll give you the choice of either the qual tickets or the GP tickets. Anyway, we were at the, I don't think you were at the event the other night at the Speedway Public Library. I don't think, were you? Oh, because I asked the question, I was at a function, but no, that was when we did an appearance at Flannery and Buchanan on North High School, which is, I'm not kidding you. I thought, how is that going to go down? Donald's appearing at Flannery and Buchanan. Well, turns out they had a meeting room in the back that I didn't know about. I've been by there so many times, and actually done eulogies in the front. I didn't know they had that thing in the back. Well, anyway, I'm looking at all these heavy-duty people at the Speedway Public Library, and so my first question was, hands in the air, please, if you can tell me what was the name of the bar on 16th Street where all the drivers used to go. And there was about 15 hands went up immediately. So, yeah, but no prizes for that tonight. So we'll have to figure out exactly how we're going to do this. I don't know whether it would be fair to ask some of you for whom this is like the third or fourth or fifth one of these this spring, but it would be nice if somebody that hasn't won anything yet would be able to have a go at this. So if that's fair for me to ask a question, and if you've already won tickets before or you really know your stuff, I'd like to sort of include somebody that hasn't got anything before. So there's a lot of stipulations on this, isn't there? And then also when we're out of the area a little bit, we could do some more general trivia, and it's interesting to hear some of the answers. But then when we're a group with like this, I think I probably need to ramp it up a couple of notches. So I'm not quite sure where to start on this one, except that. Okay, we'll try an easy one, and if you've already won tickets, so we'll ask if you would politely refrain, and then maybe we'll do something tougher. But for maybe some of you that have a casual interest, and don't call out, please, would you raise your hand, please? There is a driver this year who, if they win, would become a 4-time winner of the Indianapolis. All right, the lady I think was first. Very good. Okay. All right. So, what do you think, boss? Should we try the NASA one for the people that don't normally go? Or? Huh? My dog's even happy she won. What now? All right. Well, we did have a lot of fun with this, and I know some of you know the answer because you've done several of these. So again, I'm going to ask if you, I'm not saying if you know the answer, don't put your hand up. But if you've done a few of these this spring, if you let somebody that hasn't, and maybe we can have some fun with this one. And I've had some fun with this one with some great answers. But in the 1970s, there was a driver in the 500 who had 3 starts. To our knowledge, was the only person that ever drove in the Indianapolis 500 who had applied for the NASA space program. Now they were turned down because they didn't have sufficient education. But this was a person with good education, Ivy League sounding delivery, very intelligent, had applied for the NASA space program and had been turned down, but drove in the 500 3 times in the 70s and had a top 10 finish. Who's the only one that we know of? Well, you either already know and you've got tickets, or I know a number of you know the answer to this, so bless you for being sporting. But somebody that has not won tickets before, who are we talking about? Just raise your hand and... Yes, sir. It was not Mark Donahue, and that's a good answer, because I will tell you that is the most frequent wrong answer that we get. So no, not Mark Donahue, but that's a good guess. Looking for hands. It was not Peter Repson, no. But you're in the right era. Guesses? Good Lord. Come on. Yes. It was not Johnny Rutherford. All right, so here's the clue. We get a lot of Rutherfords. Those are all good guesses. We've had Gordon Johncock. It wasn't Gordon Johncock. All right, so the clue will be now broaden your horizons a little bit. Oh, I love this. It uses up time as well. I don't have to answer many questions. All right, broaden your horizons. Had a top 10 finish. Born in Iowa. Father was an airline pilot. Anybody? Huh? We're not going to do it? All right.
One of the people who does know.
Yes? Yeah. 9th in 1978, and don't look it up on your cell phone. You're going to love it. Janet Guthrie. Boy, I thought somebody would get it, either by cheating or just know. But no, I've had a lot of fun with that one. So we still got 2 sets of tickets. 2 sets of calls. Oh, the Grand Prix tickets went first. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. The first year we did this, nobody wanted the GP tickets. They all wanted the qual tickets. Now the GP tickets go.
Financial thing, they cost more.
Or you think you can get more on eBay for them? Is that it? All right, let's see. All right, we've had a lot of fun with this one, with answers where people are not paying attention. And I'll assume that you've been going for a while. So the Victory Circle area, whatever you want to call it, but I guess Victory Circle, has been approximately in the location where it is now since 1971. And it's changed appearance several times, but it used to be that the winners would take a couple of extra laps and then come down the straightaway or on the pit lane and go to the south end and pull on to a grassy area at the south end of the pits known as Victory Lane. So 1971 is when it moved to the Horseshoe Area, and the first person to go into the new one was Al Unser, who was the last person, hands in the air please, who was the last person to go into the old Victory Lane on the grass area at the south end of the pit. Well, actually this gentleman was, huh? Oh, all right, yes sir. What is it? It was not Mark Donahue, no. The last person to go to the old Victory Lane at the south end of the pits. He's already, what do you, there's a repeater, what do you think? Somebody that hasn't done one before. Yes, sir. What?
Say it again,
It was Al Unser. Yes, very good. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but we've had a couple of chuckles over some of the answers where one we got one more set?
One more set.
All right, then I'll use the other one and I'll tell you some of the answers. All right, now listen to this one. Since 2000, there have been 2 drivers who have finished second twice and never won. Finished second twice since 2000. So earlier it would be Roberto Guerrero and it would be Scott Goodyear, but since 2000, finished second twice and never won. Can you give me one? Yes? Bobby Rahal won in 1986. Somebody that does, there's the lady up there?
Marco Andretti?
What? Marco and no, he's second once. We got 2 people that were second twice and never won.
Here we go. Carlos Munoz.
That is correct. That's Carlos Munoz. We had 2 of the better answers that we had, and I think that uses up the tickets. So one of the better answers that we had was who finished second twice and never won, and Elio Castroneves was one of the guesses. And then another one, poor person just really wasn't thinking it through. Who was the last person to go to the old Victory Lane at the south end of the pitch? Lloyd Ruby. If you think about it, Ruby was famous for not doing something. So anyway, but it's all in good fun, and bless everybody. So I think that's about all. We talked about the museum, the Andretti exhibit, and in May, you pretty much know everything that's going on. So I don't know if there's any other notes to draw your attention to. I didn't do a very good job selling yellow shirts, so. What?
I gave away several.
Okay, very good then. Excellent. When we wind up here, or if you have to leave early, if you come and see Mayor Harmless, if you think of, by golly, you know, I know a couple that would like to do that, or a college kid. So what I'm going to do now is do the Q&A part, which I have to give the disclaimers because I've been bitten a couple of times. I think that most of you are familiar with what the disclaimers are. I don't like controversy, and that's what you tend to remember. There have been some not so pleasant memories from being out at 16th and Georgetown, and unfortunately that's what some people just want to cut straight to the chase, and sometimes not a particularly gentle way. Oh. So I'm not a gearhead. I'm technically challenged, and as I tell people, I don't like controversy, and I'm not very good on the technical end, and so if you want to talk about, and I still don't like rear-engine cars, so if you want to talk about the 1968 Lotus turbines, that's a triple whammy, but no, all in good fun. I mean, I'll basically try and do anything that you may have. What I prefer is happy questions about the people. I'm about the personalities, not the fellows and ladies now so much. I mean, I know a little bit about them, but really, you know, to me, it's the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and on into the 70s, and obviously beyond that. But it's about the people, the drivers, the owners, the characters, and the media, and so on and so forth. There's some stories that I enjoy telling that sometimes just take a little while, so I can't do them on radio because it ends up being a four-parter. So if the stories that you've heard me tell and you'd like me to retell, or you just want me to have to spin a yarn that doesn't resolve unpleasant memories, I'll basically try anything that you have. And then also another thing too is about the current and the future. I tell people I happily live in the past, and I'm still up on it. But and then personal opinions, do I have them? Yes. Do I like everything that happens? Not necessarily, but you know, it's really not fair for me to, you know, get on the soapbox on something that where I'm you know, representing the track, kind of, because now I am actually employed by them. So, questions or comments, or if you got a story, I'd love to hear about it. Yes, sir. What was the name of the bar on? No. Okay. This is a member of the Mates family. And I might even start telling Whitefront stories because I had a lot of happy memories out there.
The other night we talked about different movies. In particular, my mother had a crush on Park Eagle.
Yes.
How many different movies were actually filmed?
Okay. All right. Very good. Because I can elaborate on that a little bit. The question was, how many films were made about or surrounding the Indianapolis Speedway? And there's not an easy answer to that question because there were a number of films that were made where the 500 was either part of it, if not the central part of it. But when you say shot at the Speedway, that's the that's where some of them were not shot at the Speedway. They used stock footage. And the principal ones that were made at the track was a film called Speedway, which was made in 1929, and it was a silent film. And unfortunately, it was a bit of a corny comedy, and that was a disappointment because they had access to the garage area. In fact, I was even thinking about that driving down here because we're not very far from the circle, and there is a sequence that takes place in the circle, and you can see the little church that's next to the Columbia Club where Wilbur Shaw got married. And so anyway, this thing was made in 1929, and the principals all came here, and they had access to the garage area. And Leon DeRay appears in it. You'll see Babe Stapp in some of the scenes, like we're in the garage area with the principals acting, and the people standing around. And there's Chet Gardner, and I'll throw out a few more names, except that they're late 1929. Not all of these will compute with you, but anyway, that was. There's some great stuff in that. But there's a lot of corny stuff where you wish that they played it a little straighter. And they had full access, MGM, the newsreels were here. And then also, this was I don't know how to say, except that this was sort of a little groundbreaking for the time. Eddie Rickenbacker had just become the owner of title of the track. And so they had the idea, wouldn't it be great if we could put the camera in a vehicle at the start, which they do. And so there were actually 2 pace cars in 1929. There's the pace car proper, and then just to kind of review the situation back then, is that up until from 1956 and prior, there was only 1 lap. They would fire them up on the start line. The field would depart behind the rolling vehicle, and when they came around at the end of that first lap, the rolling vehicle would pull over and the field would be released to the starters. So you never saw the pace car at speed until 1957, when they added a second lap. So anyway, that said, they had the pace car proper, but then they had a second pace car which was identical, and a tripod in the back with a cameraman. And so when's the first time that there's footage taken out of a vehicle at the front row and the field rolling on the pace lap? 1929. And I just thought it was pretty amazing that they would depart from what had become a tradition by allowing second vehicle. That sounds like something they would do now, and some of us might not like that idea. But anyway, so I don't know what else to really say about that. But the other 2 of note were Winning and then To Please a Lady. The big wheel, a lot of that was stock footage and some mock racing action that was shot at the track, but none of the principals came here. Mickey Rooney did not come to the track until later for promotional stuff. And so every time you see him, driving, it's back projection. And so again, they used a lot of stock footage, and so you recognize some of the crashes, and then they have some stuff that was shot, I think, later in the summer, and with mock races. In fact, one of them, if you remember the plot towards the end, is that Mickey Rooney's car catches fire, and he's trying to make it to the finish line. Well, in some of the shots, that Sam Hanks in a car that had a smoke bomb that he had to let off. And he was told it wasn't toxic. And it turns out it was, and he wasn't very happy about it. So, you know, the paint jobs and the appearance of the cars keep changing from shot to shot. But anyway, a lot of the stuff, when Mickey Rooney has arrived at the track and he's walking with wonder down the pit lane, if you look at the back, you know, it's moving around a little bit. To please a lady, a lot of that was shot at the track, and they also did some stock footage. But Clark Gable was a race fan, and he'd been to the 500 at least twice in 1947 and 1948 as a guest of management. And my further guess is that Wilbur Shaw, although Tony Holman invited him, my guess is that Wilbur Shaw was the connection, because Shaw had spent a couple of winters, summers and winters, out west when the Depression was winding down, because there was so much racing going on at Legion Ascot Speedway. They were running every week and sometimes twice a week, and there wasn't much going on here. So a lot of the Midwest people didn't even run the few championship races that they were, because they make more money out running at Legion Ascot. And then the Gilmore Stadium for midgets got going, and a lot of the Hollywood people were race fans, and Clark Gable was a frequent visitor. I mean, he didn't show up 5 minutes before the trophy dash, present the trophy dash, and then leave. He actually was a heavy-duty race fan. And the fact that he was from Ohio, it wouldn't surprise me, no way to prove this, but it wouldn't surprise me if he came to the 500 as a young man, you know, before he was known. Because it's amazing the number of people that were celebrities that had come to the track when they were in college. And obviously, you know, nobody knew who they were yet. I've had people ask me, did James Dean go to the track? Probably, but we don't have proof of that. So anyway, that's tangent off of a tangent off of a tangent. But so Clark Gable was a frequent race goer, and Wilbur Shaw taught flying out there. He taught James Stewart how to fly. How about that? You know, a veteran pilot in combat and so on and so forth. Actually, I think James Stewart went back and flew in Vietnam, I think. Anyway, Wilbur Shaw had given him flying lessons. It's possible that he gave Clark Gable flying lessons as well. And so they put together this project to make a film at the track in 1950. And it was basically Clark Gable and his drinking buddies having a good time. The director of the film was Clarence Brown, who was arguably MGM's top director. He directed Greta Garbo twice. So Clarence Brown was a major, big-time director. I think the cameraman was a guy named Harold Rosson, R-O-S-S-O-N, and then Barbara Stanwyck, who was really highly regarded by everybody she met. I mean, she was a real trooper. I mean, she always played the tough babes in the movies, giving the impression that she wasn't a nice person. Everything that I've heard about her, that she was really down to earth. She was only about 5'4", which surprised a lot of people that met her because she looks taller. But apparently when she would shoot scenes, and when they were done, she'd sit down and play cards with the Carpenters, and she was just, you know, one of the gang. So anyway, she was the lady in the film, and this is probably way more than you want to know, but MGM actually purchased a car, and it's been misidentified a few times, but the car was the Don Lee Special, and which Mack Hellings had driven in 48 and 49. And they purchased that car, but they painted it up like the Wolf Motor Company number 77, which Joey Chitwood the Elder drove in the race. And so a lot of the stock footage of the race, when it's pit stops, that's Joey Chitwood in the race. But when it's the cockpit shots, it's Clark Gable in the former Don Lee special, which actually made some appearances, the Clark Gable special, but it was owned by MGM and now back in private hands and restored to the way that it was as the Don Lee special. But you'll see these things identified at like vintage car meets and so on and so forth, and there's a lot of confusion about what was which. There was a driver whose real name was Harry Isley, but he raced under the name of Bud Rose, and he did try to qualify for the 550, and had been here before that, but most of his success came on the West Coast. He raced as Bud Rose, but he looked exactly like Clark Gable. And so he was the double. So in a lot of the cockpit shots, if it's real close up, it's Clark Gable. But if it's a car pulling out of the pits, it's probably Bud Rose. And they really hit it off. And in fact, Clark Gable even offered him a full-time job as his stand-in, but Bud Rose still wanted to drive race cars, and I think he may have done a couple of other appearances, but again, I'm going off on all of these tangents. So knowing that they were going to be here for about 3 weeks, Tony Holman and Wilbur Shore said, well, we wanted to be really welcome while he's here, so let's get him a car to drive. And they knew that he had just taken delivery of a Jaguar XK 120 out in Hollywood. And so they said, let's see if we can find one, because he's been writing us letters and saying how much he loves his car. So they found one up in Chicago, and Wilbur Shaw went up and drove it back. And that was Clark Gable's drive-around car in 1950. It's part of the Museum Foundation collection. It's often on display, but it isn't right now. And that's the car with very low mileage. And it was in a commercial that when the Indy Racing League several years ago, they had a commercial with Tony George driving the thing up through the Eagle Creek, and with his wife, I think, was in the seat. But I think it's as I say, it's got very low mileage, and a lot of them were Clark Gables. They took the car to Terre Haute during the month of May. There was like a May Day parade. And believe it or not, little Terre Haute in 1950, wide open town at the time, and they were in the parade with Tony Holman driving and Clark Gable in the passenger seat. Well, they're going along at 15, 20 miles an hour, and the Jaguar's rather like a Corvette now. It doesn't want to do 15 or 20 miles an hour, and so it overheated, and they had to pull over right outside of Holman and Company. Clapper Girl with steam pouring out of it, and had to wait for the thing to cool down. Anyway, I've got a theory. If you're familiar with the film, there is a portion when Clark Gable has basically been blackballed and midget tracks, and he's the bad guy, and the headlines are coming up, and they don't want him. He's banned here and everywhere. And so he decides to sell the midget and buy a big car. And so he arrives with the midget on an open trailer to this garage, and Will Gear is the proprietor of the garage. And there's a race car for sale, the Don Lee Special. But when Clark Gable parks outside and he walks through, as he comes through the garage, there's an XK120 sitting there, and it's a lighter color. And I'll bet you anything, I don't know this, but I would bet you anything, that was his personal car. And he drove it to the studios in Westwood or wherever they were. They probably thought, let's just put it in the shot. I'll bet you anything that's his personal car that's in the shot. There is a scene that I can watch over and over again, and that is when Barbara Stanwyck arrives. It's race morning, and all of the participants are lining up for the panoramic shot, which they did every year from 1911 up until 1957 was the last one, so it's still going in 50. And if you get the 1950 panorama, Clark Gable's standing in the shot because he lined up with everybody else. But they were going to shoot a scene. And so the thing is that the photo's over, and everybody's walking back to the cars, and Barbara Stanwyck comes up to the fence and yells, "Mike, Mike, Mike." And then he goes over, Mike Brannon, he goes over, and then they have like a little scene. And if you look in the back, you can see all this activity going on. It's not back projection. It's the people. You can see Walt Faulkner and a number of the drivers and the crew are walking back to get ready for the start that's going to be in 7 or 8 minutes or whatever it is. And I thought, by golly, they probably only had a chance to do one take. I don't know that they would have had time to do a second take because everybody's moving in the back. And forgive me if I'm over the top on this, but when you think of the organization and the preparation, it's not back projection, it's real time. And then there's another bit to watch for. He has an accident late in the race, and are you glad you asked the question, by the way? Late in the race, Clark Gable has a crash, and he's taken to the infield hospital, and she goes running to the hospital, and as she arrives, there's a guard, safety patrol, in a Shirley Murphy outfit with the blue and the fifth helmet saying, lady, you can't go in there. It's Cliff Fraser, who had driven in the 500 16 times, and I think had just retired earlier that month. But Cliff Fraser had been a Hollywood stuntman. He was a full-time Hollywood stuntman who appeared in hundreds of films. I don't mean he drove a race car in a couple. He was in the Ten Commandments and was the chief chariot wrecker and did stuff where you climb down rope ladders out of a plane and drop into a car. He did, and he doubled for Katharine Hepburn and was a long time stuntman over a period of probably 25 years, and he knew Clarence Brown, and so they put him in the film, and so that's something fun to watch for, or not. I'm probably overdoing the thing here, but anyway, there were a lot of people thought that, as corny as it might seem now, for the time, it wasn't too bad at portraying the way the 500 was. It was a lot closer than the big wheel, but it was done with people who were a little more, In fact, I met Mickey Rooney in 1983 or so, and I was having lunch with Tom Keating at the Speedway Motel. Remember Tom Keating was a great writer, wrote really humanitarian stuff. And a lady came by and she said, "Oh, did you see Mickey Rooney? He's so cute. He's so short." And I said, "Mickey Rooney? Yes, he's in. He's having lunch with Red Dallin in the private room, and it turns out that there was a golf tourney coming up, and Mickey Rooney was going to be sort of like the celebrity person. So things were a lot easier in those days. So I thought, you know what? It was my understanding that Mickey Rooney never came to the track except for like a publicity shot. And I thought, I wonder if he might be interested in taking a lap around the track. And so I thought it'll be easy to work out, because it was a lot easier back then. You just call Al Blemker and he'd say, "Okay, just let the car out on the track." And so we sent the message in, and the message came back, yes, he would love to do it. And so Russ Dallin, Red Dallin's son, didn't even have a dealership yet, but he was driving the limo. And so they brought the limo around to the front of the motel. The lunch was over, and out comes Mickey Rooney. And at that time, you know, he always had this reputation for being cocky and difficult to get along with, which I think is probably not untrue, except that during this period, he was kind of in a slump and was basically shopping himself out to get any gig he could. This was before Bill and was it Sugar Babies, I think? I mean, he got famous again, and then you couldn't talk to him. But during this period, he was kind of, you know, just eager to do anything. So he came out with great enthusiasm and we sat in the chairs that go, you know, the little fold down things that go to look out the back window. And he sits down and says, "Hiya, fellas." And I thought, golly, I couldn't believe, I had to pinch myself, there's Mickey Rooney sitting right in front of us. And so out we went, and I said, "I understand that you haven't been to the track before." He said, "Well, actually, I was here for a publicity shot." But I said, "But you've never been around it?" "No." So out we go. And he had a fellow with him named George, who just as soon would have been anywhere else but where he was. And so we head down the backstretch, and the barns are that are long gone. And he says, "Hey, George, that's where Vukovich went out." And I went, and I looked at him, and he said, "That's right, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, but how did you know that?" And because I'd been led to believe that he didn't know anything about racing or care. And he said, "Oh, no." He said, "No, I don't know about Vukovich." He said, "No, I follow it." He said, "I know about the Foyts and the Unsers." And he said, "This gal, what's her name, Janet Guthrie? Yeah, she does a hell of a job." And I thought, golly, he's interested in it. So this is probably a little bizarre, but we're going down the backstretch, and I'm looking straight at him and seeing the track go by in the background, and I'm thinking, I've got the exact angle that you have when you're watching the big wheel, except the turn 2 VIP suites weren't there then. But I thought, I'm looking at this older version of Billy Coy driving in the 500, and I'm the only person that has ever had or will ever have this view. And so it's just a little. You asked the question now, but anyway. So I said I always had the impression that you didn't care about racing. So anyway, he said, "Let me tell you about the big wheel." And he told me this story. He said, I was, in fact, he was the top box office draw, I think, several times for MGM. And he said, I had been offered an opportunity to do Andy Hardy on the radio. So he said, I went in to see Louis B. Mayer, and he said, "Mickey, I don't think that would be a good idea." And he said, so I got upset and said, "All right, well then I want out of my contract." And he said, Louis B. Mayer said, "Well, if that's the way you feel about it, okay, but you owe us some pictures." And it ended up that he took everything that he could get. He shot 14 films in 1 year. And he said, this is, I didn't read this in the book. He's telling me this. And he said, I had it worked out that they would shoot around me, and I would do all my scenes either by myself or with the other people that we needed, and then I'm gone on to the next one. He said, I shot my portion of the big wheel, I shot in 3 weeks. And he said, I made 14 pictures in 1 year. And since I'm a movie buff, I found all of that fascinating. But I really don't have much time to talk about winning, except that it was shot in the summer of 1968. They were going to shoot it in the spring. With Paul Newman, who I don't know really had any interest in racing at all yet. If he did, it was very minor. Joanne Woodward obviously did not. And then Robert Wagner, who had no interest whatsoever. And I don't know if any of the others did. Richard Thomas was in it. So anyway, they were going to shoot it in the spring. And Roger Ward, who was now retired, was the technical expert. And so they thought, well, we want to be as current as possible. And a turbine almost won it last year. I mentioned the turbines and I didn't have to, but I kind of did. So they thought, well, a turbine could win this year, but we want the Paul Newman character to be in virtually what wins. And so how are we going to do this? And the thinking was, well, we'll just have to wait for the race and see what happens. And so they shot some stuff in the spring, but not very much. They decided we'll start shooting. And if Paul Newman, you know, if a turbine wins, then Newman will be in a turbine. And as you know, it was Bobby Unser with the Rislone Special. And I think it's the Crawford Oil Special, but it's painted up like the Rislone. So the point for bringing all this up was that we had some really terrible years with weather. And because the 1968 race was a nice day, you don't remember that the weather was awful during the month. And there were shortened qualifying days, there were rained out practice days, and the infield was a mess because, you know, virtually the entire infield, it was just a tiny little garage area. We didn't have VIP suites and executive parking lots. It was all grass. And the traffic just really, you know, just tore the you-know-what out of the infield. And so in the movie, it's shot in June, and when the Paul Newman character arrives, he comes in by helicopter, which was a bit of a stretch for the times because nobody was doing that yet. But anyway, when the helicopter arrives and you look at the infield and there's no grass, it's all just dried mud. And when the chopper lands, all this huge cloud of dust goes over and it goes up, and I'm thinking Clarence Cagle would have been mortified because he always kept the facility so beautifully manicured, and it looked awful at that time. But I don't know if I got too many comments about winning, except that it was shot during the summer, as I say. They paid the extras, which is amazing. They paid the extras who sat in the stands, I think it was $10 a day per, I think. And so people would come, women would come and do knitting, and kids that were out of school. And then it was funny because sometimes you'll recognize people in the stands, and then also they would move them around for different shots. And sometimes you'll see somebody in the stands, and then they're in the next shot in a different stand. But then, you know, Rutherford has a very brief speaking part. Bobby Unser has, and then there were several other people that, you know, Harkey was one of the doubles, and Bruce Jacoby and Walkup, but some of them actually had a line. And then Bobby Unser has several lines because the fact that he wins the race, and how does this work now? No, Paul Newman wins the race. That was it. He wins the race, but he comes into what is supposed to be the flag room in the motel, and he's carrying the Borg Warner trophy. And then Bobby Unser comes in, and although he'd actually really won the race, then I think he congratulates him, and he's got a small part and a Goodyear jacket on. Anyway, so after Bobby's done his couple of lines, then there's a young lady that comes in and says, "Oh," and the trophy's on the ground, and she picks the thing up to look at it, and I thought, number one, the winner doesn't get to take the trophy with him, and Foyt couldn't lift that thing, you know, let alone this young lady. And then when she puts it down, you sort of kind of makes it like a clinking sound. But anyway, that's probably more than you really wanted, and I hope I didn't. I probably should move. I've got a lot more about those because I'm a movie buff. But let's move around the room, and I will attempt to give you answers that are a lot shorter than this last one. Yes, sir. Every time we go, you look at the what?
The Bronner Hawk.
Oh, the Bronner Hawk, yes.
But the placard there says
Yeah.
it's a replica.
Yes.
And why is it a replica, and what happened to the winning car?
Okay, he's asking about the 1969 winning car is a replica, and it states that on the card. All right, what happened was in whatever year this was, but when Granatelli was still the president of the STP Corporation, he donated, through the STP Corporation, he donated the Parnelli Jones turbine and the Mario winner to the Smithsonian. And so when the turbine was on display in the museum for a number of years, it was actually owned by the Smithsonian. And then as far as the real winner, that's never been displayed. And what Vince Granatelli, the son rather than Vince the brother, they actually mocked one up. And so the car that represents the winner and states so, I don't know I don't know if anything on that thing ever was in a race ever, but they actually created a car. And maybe some of the parts were, this was off so-and-so and that was off so-and-so, but it's basically, it's a replica. But pretty faithful to it. And so the real winner remains in the vaults of the Smithsonian, and I will tell you that those are not the easiest people to deal with. And Andy actually was in Washington, D.C. once to get an honor of some kind, went there, and they wouldn't even let him see it. And I kidded him about it, and I said, well, you wanted to be a big deal and donate it to the Smithsonian. If you donate it to the Indianapolis Speedway, it would be on display every day. And so it remains there. I think they tried to get it. I don't know how hard, but they tried to get it. And there was even a suggestion that they might reach out to the Vice President of the United States, and whether they did that or not. But anyway, the real one has never been displayed, and so that's the reason for that. And I don't know if you asked me anything else. Yeah. All right. Yes. Yes, sir.
Andretti had a car that crashed
Yes.
right before
Yes.
qualifying.
Yes.
You don't know anything about that?
Sure. Yes. The car that won the race in '69, you know, the number of times that Mario was a shoe-in to win, or the favorite. I mean, in 1966, he was a favorite to win the race. So when he finally won it in '69, he was overdue. But that's one of them racing deals. In 1969, he was part of a 3-car effort within the STP Corporation to drive Lotuses, 4-wheel drive, turbocharged, rear-engined Lotuses. And the drivers were Mario, Graham Hill, and Jochen Rindt. And as I've said on a number of occasions, that's the front row, right? Guess what? Mario started running above the single lap track record quite early in the month. Clint Bronner wasn't crazy about the car, but Mario and Jimmy McGee, and they were very close in age, they liked this thing and kept tweaking it, and it was going faster and faster. But they weren't sure about the reliability, because Colin Chapman famously wanted the things to be as light as possible, and safety wasn't always foremost in his thoughts. Well, so Mario's running like 172, 173 miles an hour in practice. Hill and Rindt in the other two. And Bronner and McGee pretty much had the Mario car. And the two others were run by Chapman and the Lotus team. And they were running, and I'm not making this up, they're probably about 10 miles an hour slower. They were having a struggle. Well, Mario was a shoo-in to win the pole. But the first qualifying weekend got rained out. Yes, there was one qualifying attempt made by, and I'm not going there, but anyway, it came to pass that it's Sunday, and there were no takers, no 4-lap runs. And so qualifying now was going to get pushed into days 3 and 4. So more time for Mario to practice. And then on Wednesday afternoon, fairly late, he had a major crash. A hub broke, I think, and he hit the wall, and the Lotus just broke into thousands of parts and was totally destroyed. And he got flash burns on his cheeks. And so obviously the car was done. And so very quickly, well, what are we going to do? Well, we entered the Hawk that won at Hanford, but we weren't going to run it here. We entered it to get garage space. So by golly, we better get that thing going and see if we can get it in the show. And so Mario went ahead and qualified it for the middle of the front row, which was pretty amazing because Foyt won the pole, Bobby Unser was on the outside, and Mario's right in the middle with a car they weren't even going to run. But he was very self-conscious about the flash burns on his cheeks. So in the qualifying shots, he left the helmet on. He's got the full face, he's got the open face helmet, but he's got the sock is up over his nose so you can't see the cheeks. And that was right after he made the qualifying run. So he didn't refuse to have the photograph taken, but he didn't take the helmet off. And then either the following day or on Monday, when they did the front row shot, and then the drivers stand in the cockpits with no helmet on and in street clothes, as some of you know, or maybe most of you know, it's Foyt and Bobby Unser, and in the middle, it ain't Mario, it's Aldo, John's dad, who was the twin brother, and he just stood in. And so that's kind of a little bit of trivia. If you didn't know that, I was sort of kind of surprised because I think that's fairly generally known. And so anyway, then, so Mario went ahead and won with the Bronner Hawk. But a strongly favored, as he had been to win in 66 and in maybe other years, in 69, I think the thinking was, well, look, we'll just do the best we can. And, you know, we'll try to run 500 miles and whatever we get, we get. Well, the forecast that race day was going to be very, very hot. And so Clint Bronner and the crew installed an externally mounted radiator right behind the cockpit. And when they come out for carburation runs, where nobody uses a carburetor, but traditions die hard, there were complaints by some of the other participants, like from Houston, Texas, for instance, who said the configuration can't be changed. And sure enough, the rule, and I don't remember exactly how it was worded, but the car had to start the race in exactly the same configuration in which it had qualified. And so Fengler came down to Bronner and said, you know, that's going to have to come off. And so they went back to the garage, and supposedly Bronner sent everybody home. Oh, they took the radiator off, and then they sent everybody home, and then he supposedly locked the doors and installed another radiator underneath the seat where nobody would see it. And so throughout the race, Mario was sitting on top of a radiator. And the race sort of came to him. I mean, Foyt led, but Mario was always right there. Ruby led, and poor old Ruby, all of the stories read that you know, where he left before the refueling mechanism was probably disconnected and it ripped the side out, and the methanol came out onto the track. And everybody said, well, Ruby was leading when that happened. Well, to be fair, Mario stopped to make a stop, putting Ruby into the lead, and then as soon as Ruby came in, then Mario went back to the front, and then when the thing got ripped out. But Ruby would very likely have finished second or given Mario a run for the money, but now he's out. And so Foyt had some difficulty, Joe Leonard had difficulty, and so Mario basically cruised the last half of the race. And but the heat was very intense because it was a hot day, and he talked about the fact that as the race wore on, he could actually smell the stakes from the infield going. It was hard to concentrate because there weren't many cars running, and you'd have to lap somebody occasionally. But he said, I was hungry, and I'm smelling this aroma of steaks. So anyway, he goes ahead and wins the race that nobody expected. And then it got better because after they were back in the garage area, and whether it was later that day or the next day or whatever it was, when they tore down the transmission, because they were getting ready to go to Milwaukee, they tore down the transmission, and not only did no oil come out, but hundreds of brown flakes. There was no oil in it at all. There was not a drop of oil came out. And how that thing kept running, when it's your day, it's your day. So probably a lengthy answer. Can we get a couple more in? All right, yes, sir.
Now, this has been going around for a long time. Can you tell us about the drag strip or the drag race in the parking lot of the hotel?
What about the drag race?
In the hotel parking lot with the ounces?
In the hotel parking lot?
They had a drag race with pace car, where all the drivers had pace car. And they had a drag, bottom and out, had a drag race in the Speedway hotel parking lot.
Oh, well, I don't know that I knew about that one, but I'm not surprised. So I don't know if there's I don't have any details on it, but Bobby Unser was not able to rent a car in Indianapolis for quite some time. So no, I'm sorry, I don't have really anything to add to that. I don't dispute that it happened, but no. All right, somebody else? Okay, yes, sir.
Regarding the track itself, that it was designed 100 years ago, and it's essentially flat, is it not?
9 degrees and 12 minutes in the turns.
9 degrees.
Yeah.
And now with the, so my question is, how does that relate to the other tracks? You mentioned the Grand Prix, which runs, kind of like runs through a city, doesn't it?
Oh, you mean the Indy GP?
No, Monte Carlo.
Oh, okay. What?
Didn't you mention that before, the Monte Carlo?
I don't know where you're going with this. There's a road course inside the infield, and they call it the Indy GP. It's had a variety of sponsors.
I'm talking about the European
Yes.
competitor or
Okay.
analogy to the Indy 500, which
Yes.
is called what? The Indy, the Grand Prix?
The French Grand Prix you were talking about earlier that had the same number of years or.
Yeah, it had the same, it goes back 100 years.
I still don't know where you're going with this. There's an event that opens what used to be the month of May, and it's called the Indy GP, but there's been various sponsors. That's on the road course on the infield. And so they go through the infield, but they go down the main straightaway in the opposite direction.
Well, now, what is the chatter about the fact that the modern cars are so much faster and they
Yes.
can really, in a sense, maybe require a more banking and so on?
If they put more banking, they would go faster. I think the thinking is the racetrack, it's there. It's up to the race driver to figure out the best way to get around it. That's the challenge. As the speeds have gone up, I just thought of something here. I was thinking we were ending at 7:30, but we can actually, what time do you want to stop? And I'm not avoiding the question. We can go till 8. Yeah, we need to be out at 8.
Well, that's it. We have to close it.
What time would you like me to start winding down?
7:55, you gotta start thinking about it. 7:55.
All right then, very good. All right, so I don't know really how to address this other than that the track was built in 1909, and in 1935 and earlier, there was a steeper outer bank in the turns, which was taken out in the summer of 1935 for reasons that I won't go into now. But since then, we're told that the banking is 9 degrees and 12 minutes in the turn. Now, I don't know how they figure it because it's parabolic. But anyway, it's up to the driver and the equipment that he has under him to negotiate the turn. And if it was banked like Talladega, they would go faster.
What's that? Talladega, what's that?
What is it?
It's an NASCAR track.
It's a NASCAR track. You mean what is the banking or what is?
Well, okay, never mind.
It's a 2.66 mile track, and the banking is considerably steeper. It's anybody know what it is? I don't. Is it 30 degrees or somewhere in that range? I think. Yeah.
What state is that in?
Alabama. So anyway, I don't know that I can really. Maybe I should do a one-on-one with you, if you like.
No, it's not necessary. It sounds like it's historical, and it sounds too then like the cars that race in it must be kind of designed differently than they would be designed if they were running on a really banked track.
Well, yeah, there would be the same cars, but they would make suspension changes and that I don't quite understand. But as far as going through them, and I don't know if this will work for you or not, and it's sort of kind of a self-serving story on myself riding the two-seater with actually several times, but I've done it with both Al Unser and Mario. And I have a reason for bringing this up, other than to show off and say I rode with Mario and Al. But it was this. I had done it a couple of times before, and then didn't do it for a while. And when I did with the two of those, just a few weeks, months apart, the speeds had picked up considerably. And so when I was done with both of them, I asked them the same question, got exactly the same answer. I said, it seemed like that was faster than when I did it a few years ago. Can you estimate the speeds at a couple of the different portions? They said, we can tell you precisely. When we're at the start finish line, we're doing about 187. And through the turns, we're doing 177. They both told me that independently. And I said to both, I wasn't aware of any deceleration at all going through the turns. And they said, there isn't any. It scrubs 10 miles an hour off going through the turns. I don't know if that will do anything for you, but if you can figure if they're running 230 miles an hour, then it would scrub off even more speed through the turn. But the thing is that the tires are wide enough now, and the thing is set up that the tires will adhere to the track. If they were narrower and bending over, it wouldn't. They wouldn't be able to go through the turns as fast, or if they tried to, they'd end up looking at the concrete. If I can lighten this up a little bit, and I've got all kinds of stuff that I probably should have been telling you instead of talking about the movies, but there's some really great phrases that I've picked up over the years from different drivers, and one of the ones I loved was Neil Bonnet, who was one of the funniest guys you could meet, and a terrific, I think, on TV as an analyst. And so they were talking about push and loose, which is oversteer and understeer, not necessarily in that order. And so when it came up one time, while the race was going on, and Neil Bonnet, they said, well, can you explain it? And Bonnet said, well, he said, if you're loose, he said, it spins around on you. If you've got push, then you get a real good look at the wall right before you hit it. And I thought that was, which has nothing to do with going through the turns, I don't think. So why don't I get with you afterwards? And
That actually explains everything right there.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, understeer versus oversteer, and the banking, of course, would prevent one or the other.
Okay. Well, he was talking about stock cars, and honestly, as far as Jerry Sneva told me one time, the late Jerry Sneva was a really great guy. I wish that he could have had more fortune in his career than he got. But anyway, I think he said the steering wheel, he said there's like 4 degrees difference per lap. when you're going through the turns, he said, he said, there's not a whole lot of steering to do, but you better be pretty precise. But I think he said the steering wheel will change 4 degrees during a lap. When I said I don't have a technical knowledge, then my other line to follow that up with, which I didn't do tonight, is that I have picked up a bunch of stuff parrot fashion, so I can answer your question, but I don't know what the hell I'm talking about while I'm doing it. All right, well, we have a little more time than I thought we had, so anyway, yes, sir.
Who was the last relief driver?
The last relief driver, all right, thank you, I love that stuff. There's an anecdote with this. There's a clarification between a driver switch, and there's been a few of those, during a red flag. And so the last time that happened was in '04 when Robbie Gordon, there was a rain delay, and Robbie Gordon was trying to do the 500 and World 600, sorry, I still call it that in Charlotte. And so looking at the forecast, they figured out what, we'll have to have a standby if I have to leave and go to Charlotte. And so Jacques Lazier had not qualified for the race. And so they employed Jacques Lazier to run the car in practice. They made a seat for him. So this wasn't just jumping in and taking off. He'd actually practiced with the car, and they knew what all of the changes would needed to be made if he would take over at some point. And he actually started off the race in one of the turns as Robbie Gordon's spotter. And then when it rained and they were down, and then they realized, well, hey, I got to go to Charlotte. Then Jacques came in, and they made all the changes, and then he ran a bunch more of the race. So there was a driver switch. The last time that a driver actually got in while the race was on to to take over and go out was in 1977. And it was Larry Boom Boom Cannon for John Mailer. And Cannon was very proud of this, actually for a couple of things. One was that guy was out there for years, and he had 3 starts. And see if you can figure out the theme. His 3 starts were 1974, 1976, and 1980. Anybody see a theme there? How good are you? Rutherford. And it was funny when we realized that, and Rutherford said, God, if I'd known that, I would have put you, bought you a ride every year. So anyway, he was proud of that. But then the other one was that in '77, John Mailer was getting tired as the race was wearing on, and a guy named Don Murgard from Cincinnati was the owner, and it was an Eagle, and Mailer was clearly running out of personal horsepower, and when he came in to make a pit stop, they basically told him, hey, look, you're done, get out. I don't think he wanted to get out. And but he did, and he was staggering around all over the place. His face was purple, and the hair was mussed. And he'd evidently helped with some of the sponsorship, or as a European put it to me very politely one time, had helped share in the expenses. And you can take that in. Isn't that lovely? I had a Belgian Grand Prix driver named Andre Palette, who drove for the Gordini team, and forgive me if I'm way off of here, but he actually, he was Belgian, but schooled in England and very British. And he said that I helped with the expenses. So anyway, Mailer had done that. And they had actually had Al Laquasto was to be a relief driver on standby. And Laquasto was nowhere to be found, but Larry Cannon, who had missed the show, was there. And so, all right, fine. Well, Mailer's like 6'2" and fairly thin, and Larry Cannon was short and pretty husky, but you make yourself fit. When you're in his position, you make yourself fit. And I may go off and tell you another little line about Foyt that you might enjoy. So Cannon gets in. they strap him in, and then he notices, well, let's go. What's happening? And so he waved one of the crew guys over and said, what's the holdup? Race is going on. He said, well, there's a discussion between Murgaard and Mailer because Larry's deal was, he said, I was going to get $1,000 to be the relief driver. You ready for that? $1,000. And he said, Murgaard just told Mailer that, and he wants to take it out of Mailer's 40%. And Mailer's saying, no, you pay for him. And they're arguing. And Cannon says, but the race is going on. Start the engine, except I missed out a word there. And so finally they get the thing fired up, and then he goes out. So the race was almost over, and he actually got in 8 laps. And not very fast, because he's still learning the car, and by the time he's comfortable, the checker's out. So he was in it for 8 laps, but they finished 14th, and he was very proud of the fact. He said, I'm one of the few people that can say I was on the track when A.J. Foyt won his fourth 500. So relief drivers was always a great interest of mine. And I think I think they're fairly well documented, but I don't know that it's 100%. And one of my fantasies was that I used to think about, because I was really into the relief drivers at one point, and making sure that everybody got credit, even if it was only for a couple of laps, because sometimes there would be quite a number of changes, and it would get very confusing. And some of the records will show for a pit stop and change of driver, but it doesn't say who it is. And maybe it would have been wrong anyway, because sometimes the early programs would print the list of potential relief drivers, and sometimes somebody will assume, well, that's got to be so-and-so, but maybe it wasn't, because it wasn't Al Aquasto, it was Larry Cannon. And I often thought that, wouldn't it be neat if I could go back in time and be in the pits for every race that was ever held, and make sure that the proper relief driver was credited for getting in. The extreme on relief drivers, and you didn't ask this, but in 1954, Art Cross started the race from the back, qualified late in a car he wasn't even entered in, bonsai qualifying run, led it for some laps, and at 300 miles he got overcome by heat, came in, and Johnny Parsons, the 1950 winner, was out of the race. And in those days, on a hot day especially, if you were out of the race, you would shop yourself. Either if you'd missed the show or you were in the race and out, you'd go up and see if anybody needs a relief driver. And so Parsons got in, and he ran not very far, probably about 20, 23 laps, and came in and said, I'm sorry, the heat's too much for me. So Sam Hanks got in. Sam Hanks ran for a little while, came in. Andy Linden got in and ran for a few laps. And then finally Jimmy Davies got in and finished the race. Went the 200 laps, finished 11th, long after the winner, when they would keep the thing running and people would be going home and cars were still finishing 7th and 8th and everything. Jimmy Davies took the checkered flag in 11th place. He was the 5th different driver, and that's the record for the most different drivers in one car. Quick thing about fitting, which I just thought I would throw this one out. Bob Riley of Riley and Scott, who never used a computer, all of his drafting was done with draft boards. He never used a computer. Anyway, he was talking about, he thought Foyt was the greatest, because when they built the first of the Coyotes, there were several different versions. Some of them were Lotus copies, but the Coyote that looks like the 77 winner, the first one was in 73. And so they went to test it, and he said, Foyt comes in after a few laps, and he said, well, it feels great, it handles, But he said, I've got a problem. I can't reach the gear shift. And so Riley says, oh, golly, he said, I thought, what are we going to do? So Foyt says, oh, it's okay, because I reach over with my left hand and change the gears. Well, this is not a road course, but anytime he went out to the pits, and Riley said, well, maybe we can do it. No, Foyt said, no, it's okay. I'll do it like this. And I thought, I don't think Nigel Mansell would do that. That didn't get us. Oh, this is being recorded. I shouldn't do these now, should I? So anyway, thank you. I love the relief drivers, and thank you for asking that question. Yes, Tom?
Why was the one scheduled for 300 miles?
Okay, good question. It's great to see you again, by the way. It's been a while. And thank you for playing at my daughter's wedding. When my one of my daughters got married, and they decided they would like some music, so I hired a band, and it was a harp, a flute, and cello. Yeah, okay. Thank you. It was great. I got a lot of comments on the music, and I hired the band. So, all right. Anyway, so 1916, and the popular version is that they decided to make it 300 miles because the United States was possibly entering World War I, and that as a conservation of rubber and oil and other stuff like that, that they would run a 300-mile race. That's not what happened. Carl Fisher, believe it or not, began to think that 500 miles was too long. And so it was actually scheduled as a 300-mile race for that reason. And instead of starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, they started at 1. And I guess the crowd, expressed their disapproval. And so either before the race or as the race was going on, it was decided, well, next year will be a 500 again. And then next year there wasn't a race because the war came. As it turned out, it was great because they didn't use as many supplies, but that's not the reason that it was 300 miles. All right. I picked up the pace a little bit. Yes, sir. How many drivers have died at the track or in the race? Well, I will, I'm not fond of answering that question, but I will turn it around on you and then ask you a couple of questions, and then you might forget that I didn't answer the question. But I will ask you the question not to embarrass you, but are you fairly new to this then? Or are you yeah, well, I know what the public impression is, so I will ask you this question, and this is race only. When was the last time that a driver received injuries during the race and then passed away on a later day? That's part one. And then part two, and this is race, when was the last time that a driver actually lost their life on race day? I know some of these people will know the answer.
Sweet Savage.
Sweet Savage was the last one in 1973, where he sustained serious injuries and survived 33 days. So that's the last time that a driver received injuries in the race and then later died. And then the last time that a driver actually lost his life on race day, Eddie Sachs and Dave McDonald in 1964. So I won't gloat, I won't puff out the chest and everything, but do the math. Is that amazing? Because I think the popular conception is that it's annually or every other year or whatever. And when you do the math, that is absolutely extraordinary, I think.
Sweet Savage died from a contaminated blood.
Well, there is that theory out there. And here we go with not everything, I don't know that everything that you read or hear out there you can take to the bank. What I will tell, and I don't want to get into trouble here, but this is probably going to be coming up a lot in the next few weeks. But I will tell you that I was working for USAC in 1973, and Dr. Hanna came in the office, probably a week or so after the race. And I said, how's he doing? And he said, pretty grave. And he said, there's been people to see him. I said, savage. But he said, he's on life support, but he's conscious. I said, well, what would happen if they took him off the life support? He said he wouldn't survive. And so I know that what you said there, and I'm not going to say any more than that's not how I remember it at the time. But I'm not a doctor. Did you notice that I didn't answer his question? Yeah. When it comes to practice qualifying, it's rather more. But let me give you this one. A qualifying attempt is after you've taken the flag. So Gordon Smiley and Chuck Rudy had gone out to make a qualifying attempt and were on the track by themselves, but they hadn't taken the green. So when is the last time that a driver actually was fatally injured on a qualifying run? Yes, sir.
1935.
Boy, you are good. You are very good. You and I need to talk. Stubby Stubblefield in 1935, when it was 10-lap qualifying, and obviously this gentleman knows his stuff, but that is the last time. Huh? It was the eighth lap. You are correct. Eighth of a 10-lap run. But that's the last time that a driver was actually fatally injured on the run. And I know I get that argument with Smiley. Smiley had not taken the green. He was on the warm-ups. That's extraordinary, I think. I think the total number May-related, I think, is 41. And then there's been some others at other times, but I don't really want to belabor that. But normally, everybody's so shocked to learn 1973 and 1964. I come out of there and think, I never did give them the answer that they asked for, but I don't think they realized that. No, forgive me, I'm probably a little bit saucy this evening. All right, let's in order to give time to be able to get out and then get the doors shut at a reasonable time. The old 500 course, which went from 7 until 9, I think when we were at the Speedway Motel, we could go till 11:30. I think. Well, we're not doing that tonight. Does somebody have a quick one to wind up with? Yes. Well, two actually. All right, you first.
Hey, Donald, we were talking about qualifying.
Yes.
I loaded at 31 Indy 500, so my qualifying is what I know are 4 lap
Yes.
averages. Sorry, just quickly, 10 seems like a long time to be out there. It would take days to qualify everybody, seems like that. Now, shed a little light on it for me when we went to the 4 lap qualifying runs.
Oh, when did they go to 4-lap qualifying?
Sure.
Oh, all right. I wasn't sure what the question was. All right. The first time, and I should shorten this one up, or maybe you should have asked me that some time ago and save some of this other stuff. The first time that they did the 4-lap qualifying, up to 3 attempts, but only 1 checkered flag, was 1920. And there was no stipulation on number of warm-ups. And then also, for the first few years, you didn't have to be on the track by yourself. And Ralph De Palma, people would make deals with Ralph De Palma to follow him while they were making their qualifying run, so they were actually getting a tow because towing or drafting or whatever you want to call it, that's not new. That was going back before World War I. But anyway, so it was 4 laps from 20 to 1932. And then from 33 to 38, it was 10 laps, 25 miles. And so Bill Cummings won the pole in 1933, and I think it was like 12 minutes. And the people down towards the end, they were making runs for like 14 minutes. And then in 1939, they went back to 4 laps. And it's still there, except that they've modified. The old up to 3, but only 1 checkered flag, that went away. So I don't know, does that cover it for you?
Yes, sir, thanks.
All right, you are welcome. And then, yes. How many brothers? A lot more than you would think. I don't know that I would get them all. I mean, way more. What was the first year in which brothers raced against each other in the same 500? Bill and Harry Endicott in 1911. So there are several people that won with a brother in the lineup. Ralph De Palma's victory in 1915, his brother John made his only start. And then it was George and Hal Robson. But as far as brothers, there's Jerry, Bobby, and Alan Sir, Gaston, Louis, and Arthur Chevrolet, but never any more than 2 at the same time. Buddy and Jacques Lazier, Don Bill Dale Whittington, in fact with all 3 in one race. That's the only time that that's happened. And a bunch of fathers and sons, but I'm sorry? No, they're cousins, yeah. Michael and Jeff, Dick and Jim Rathman, and don't ask me to go there on that one. Dick is really Jim and Jim is really Dick. I'm missing a bunch. Tom and Jerry Sneva, Rick and Roger Mears, Pancho Carter and Johnny Parsons, half brothers, different fathers, same mother. Golly, there's more. I think there's probably about 30 total. What is it? Oh yeah, Gary and yes, thank you, Golly. Gary and Tony Battenhausen. Yes. Boy, Gary would give me a hard time for that's all I could think of at the moment. I never know when to shut off, do I? We've got time for one more question. Yeah. All right. No, I'm just throwing that out. So I don't know that I got them all. If anybody would like to do the yellow shirt program, and I can't recommend that highly enough from the people that I've talked to, Mayor Harmless has the thing. I hope this was okay. I kind of apologize in a way because I went in areas where I normally wouldn't go. I was probably way too long on movies, and should have got to more of you and done shorter answers. But I like telling anecdotes, and when I'm driving home, I will get the other brothers that I that I overlooked. Now, did I say Buddy and Jacques Lazier? Yeah. Okay. There's a neat little trivia. Well, golly, nah. I'll just cut it off. All right then. Okay, well, thank you. I love trivia with goofy things, so just this one, which I know that most of you know this, and I just think this is phenomenal. Well, actually, there's 2. There's been 771 different drivers start in the Indianapolis 500. How many by the name of Smith? 0. And then there have been 9 ladies driving the 500, and this year there's a possibility of a second, but we know 1. So what's the surname of the only female that we know is going to run in this year? Pippa Mann. What's the name of the only female? Mann. I love this stuff. But anyway, thank you all. Bless you. And we'll walk out with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you, Donald. That was great.